Hi everyone, and welcome to the second video of my beginner craft series. If you missed the first video, me and my girlfriend showed everyone how to make some pretty awesome bleached clothing. So if you're interested in that, go check out that video. Today we're going to talk about everything you need to know to start watercolor. This is going to include what materials you need, some techniques that you can do, and we're going to be completing a project together. So let's talk about what we need. First, we need watercolor paper. It's very important to get actual watercolor paper because it's heavier and it's thicker, so your paper's not going to get all wonky underneath all the water that we add to it, because that's what happens when you put water on paper. It gets all deformed, and we want to have the least of that happening, and with watercolor paper, that's what you'll get. Next, we need our actual watercolors. I use the Winsor & Newton travel palette. It comes with 12 colors and a little travel brush that you can put water into so that you can paint with that on the go if you want. And it has 6 little water wells for mixing. Next, let's talk brushes. For me, I like getting watercolor brushes that are meant for watercolor because they hold the water and the pigment so much better than just a regular multi-purpose brush. They differ in sizes. I've done small paintings, I've done large paintings with this, so it's really a good multi-use set. Like I said, transcend. Next, I'm just going to use some pencils for light tracing. We also need something to hold our water in. Mine is just this silicone collapsible water cup. It has some grooves on the bottom, but you could use a plastic solo cup. If I didn't have this, that's what I'd be using. Anything that you can keep your water in. And also some paper towels. Paper towels are very useful for a lot of things in watercolor. We're also going to be using some painter's tape. I get the green frog tape. I feel like it gives me the cleanest lines, but you can use any painter's tape. It gives you a cleaner edge, it holds your paper down so that the wonkiness I was talking about earlier doesn't happen. It will still happen a little bit, but we're trying to prevent that as much as possible, and that is what you use painter's tape for. Lastly, you need water, so run to the tap and get some. Now that you know what we need, let's get started.
Welcome to the voiceover. So first I'm just adding a little bit of water into each of my colors. Then I let it sit for a second and we're going to start swatching. So I recommend color swatching your palette because the only thing that tells you the color is the little packaging that it comes in. And sometimes that's hard to keep track of, obviously, because you take it off so that you can get to the paints. So after you get a new palette, I recommend making a color swatch. You only have to do this once, and you're just going to put a little bit of color in each place that your palette has. So on the top, you're going to put it in each place, and then when you move to the bottom row, you're going to put that underneath the top row because that's where they are in your palette. Super simple, super quick. I just recommend it so that way you know what color you're choosing. Sometimes they're a little bit hard to tell. And then after this, we're going to go into a couple of techniques that we're going to be using during our project. So the first technique that we're going to be using is wet on dry. It's when you have wet paint on dry paper. The colors are super vibrant, but it is a little bit hard to blend, as you can see right there. Next, we're going to go to wet on wet, where you add a wash of water and it makes your ink and your pigment just kind of spread out a little bit. It's super easy to blend, but the colors are lighter. Now, dry brushing is going to be our most pigmented technique, but it does give us a little bit of a funky kind of crackly texture, but it's super vibrant. You can also scrub out pigment with a wet brush. Now let's move straight into the project. I'm going to start by taping down my paper, making sure that it's as flat as I can get it against the table that I'm working on, or the clipboard that I'm working on, you know, whatever you are doing this project on. Now going into tracing, I slowed down this section a little bit because you can't really see what I'm doing. But I'm basically just going back and forth, kind of mapping out where I want my mountains to be. You know, the furthest mountains, the closest mountains, and some of those foreground trees. Next, we're going to go in and with that wet on wet technique, I'm going to wash out my sky and then just start blending a couple of different blues. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to take out some of that pigment with a dry paper towel. You can also use a dry brush, but I prefer to do a dry paper towel. Next, we're going to go into our furthest mountain range. Mine is flat across the top, and I'm going to go in with a super duper light color because it's the furthest away. And then we'll move to the second furthest, still with a light color. This is a light green, and I'm doing this on dry paper, so we're using that wet on dry technique for a little bit more vibrancy. It's not going to be too detailed because it's still pretty far back in the background, but yeah, we're just going to use a light green. Now I'm mixing up a little bit darker of a green for my next mountains, and we waited for the other mountain to completely dry before we did this so that we could have crisp lines and our colors weren't blending together. But for this one, I'm also going to add a little bit of a darker color for some differences in texture because it's a little bit it's a little bit closer. Next, we're going to mix up a way darker color for the foreground. That's what I'm doing here, and I even made it darker than this. So I'm just kind of going over that. We'll get into a little bit more detail, but I wanted it to be a little darker, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of layering it on there to get it a little bit darker because this is our closest mountain. And then I'm going to let that dry completely. And then I'm going to go in with the side of my cat's tongue brush and make some little trees along the mountain's line. I don't really know what to call that, but because it's not really a horizon line, it's just like the mountain's line. And then my camera cut out here for a second, but I'm going to make some more rounded strokes as we get to the bottom of the paper, and this is mostly to kind of indicate that we're getting closer and those trees are getting bushier. I went back in and darkened up my furthest mountain range because it was blending into the back a little bit too much. It was blending into the sky a little bit too much. Now I'm going in with a almost black color. I don't want completely black. This is a brownish green, but it's really, really dark for those tree trunks. And I'm just going to add them wherever I feel like it. It really does not matter where you put them. I like to keep some space for my background to pop through. I also added a couple mini ones, but yeah, just put those trees wherever you want. Here I'm adding them, and I'll slow down in 1 second to kind of show you guys. I'm just swiping back and forth and adding dots everywhere. You can do more dots, you can do more lines. This is really stylistic when it comes to trees. I prefer to do small strokes and dots because I think it looks the most like leaves. That's just the way I like to do it. Making sure that, you know, where your trees overlap, your leaves are overlapping, because that's how it is naturally. You want this to be super organic. Over in the corner, I'm just acting like the tape isn't there, and I'm just painting the tree how I normally would. And then I go into the smaller ones with the same technique. Now I'm making a lighter green with some yellow to highlight some of these leaves to add a little bit of depth to our trees. If you like the way it looks, you can totally stop, but I just added a little bit more depth to the trees with some lighter colors. I even went in a second you'll see I went in with a little bit of white too, just a touch, and super lightly, like I tapped it out and everything. So here's where I'm adding the white. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Just make sure if you want sharp lines, you're letting your paper completely dry, and make sure your paper completely dries before you take the tape off right here. Take the tape off at an angle so it doesn't rip your paper, and then go ahead and sign your work. That's all.
This is the finished product of the second installment in my beginner craft series, where I covered everything you need to know about watercolor. If you missed the last one, the first part of this series, I recommend that you go watch it and make some super cool bleach painted clothing. But today we painted just a piece of paper with some watercolors, and I hope you guys learned all there is to start your journey of watercolor. I really love watercolor. It's something that is super creative, and every person is different when it comes to watercolor and the style. But I love the organic way that watercolor acts on paper, and it's something that you have to have a lot of patience with. So I hope you guys had patience with me as I tried to teach you guys a little bit about watercolor today. So if you have any questions for me, leave it down in the comments. Let me know if you did it and how you did, and if you're going to come back for the next video in my beginner craft series. Bye guys.